2 reviewers, 1 review. Let's talk about Karate Kid Legends.
Hello everyone, welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. And this week we're talking about Karate Kid Legends. But before we get into that, we got some movie recommendations for you. So, Daniel, what's the best thing you watched this week?
So this one is a little bit of a cheat. So in preparation for this, I actually rewatched the original Karate Kid because I had not seen it probably in 25 years. And then I actually ended up watching Karate Kid 1, 2, and 3 before watching Legends. And 2 and 3 are not amazing, but the original Karate Kid really does hold up. It is just a very straightforward underdog story, likable characters, humor. It's very 80s. The karate is actually not bad. It's really easy to see why this movie was such a hit back then and really got people really into karate, because kind of after spending basically a day watching Karate Kid movies, I was really into it. So I would just recommend the first movie just on its own, right? Regardless of any other sequels, regardless of the new one. Karate Kid is just a good watch still.
I actually haven't watched that in quite a while as well, actually. Probably a very long time. So one that I probably should rewatch, especially after watching the new one, for sure. But my best thing that I watched this week, and this one actually surprised me, but it's Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, which is a animated TV series on Disney. And I remember when it first came out, I was very much not interested in it. And that was mainly because I'd seen things like Arcane, Blue Eye Samurai, Cyberpunk, etc., where the animation quality was a lot great, a lot more modern, a lot more newer. And then this show was kind of presented, and it was kind of presented as just like on Disney Plus. And I was a bit like, doesn't look that great, not really that interested. But the other day I just kind of chucked it on just to put something in the background that was like light and easy to watch. And I found myself really engrossed in it. And the main reason for that is it just doesn't follow the typical Spider-Man story. Again, I'm not, super into the comics, so they might have done, some of these things in the comics, but it doesn't follow the trope that no one knows who Spider-Man is and he's, just fighting these villains. It does interesting things like Norman Osborn figures out that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and he's trying to work with him. And I haven't got to the point where things might turn sinister between Norman Osborn and Peter Parker, but it was just like an interesting twist on their dynamic in their relationship. And it does things like that constantly throughout the series. And every time they make a change to the typical Spider-Man story that I'm used to, I find myself pleasantly sort of surprised with it and, pleasantly enjoying myself with the new sort of fresher take on the Spider-Man story. So yeah, it's good. It's fun. It's lighthearted. It's, really, really quick episodes. But it just tells a different type of story. And Spider-Man in this is likable. I feel like a lot of the characters in this are, quite likable, quite well done as well. And yeah, it's just easy fun, pretty much.
That's the new one, right? From like a year or two ago?
I think it was about like a year or so ago when it came out. But yeah, it's the new one. It's the one that was loosely tied to the Spider-Man in the MCU. And I do feel like they reference things like the Civil War fight scene. But it's from the perspective that Peter Parker or Spider-Man wasn't part of that actual fight, and it just kind of follows the events from there.
Mm-hmm. I might check that out again. I think I watched half of the first episode and couldn't really get into it, and it seemed to be aimed at a significantly younger age group as well. At least that was my impression at the time, so that's not really the case.
Honestly, sometimes I like these, like, just kind of childish cartoons. It's just something that I like putting on in the background sometimes, when, especially if I'm like just doing a bit of work on my laptop and I just want something easy to watch on the TV. But yeah, this one kind of grabbed my attention this time around. And I actually actively found myself wanting to get to the next episode each time. On to the main event. Daniel, would you like to give the people a synopsis of Karate Kid Legends?
So Karate Kid Legends is a martial arts drama film about this guy, Li Fong, who grows up in Beijing in China. He moves with his mother to New York. There he makes the acquaintance of the local pizza shop owner and his daughter, who it turns out is training for a boxing match to essentially win the prize money so that he can pay off his debts. Even though Li Fong has promised his mother to never fight again, he ends up training this guy in secret so that he has a chance of winning. When that guy gets injured, Li Fong enters a different tournament by himself in order to win and in order to use the prize money to pay off his girlfriend's and her father's debts. And that is essentially the plot. What did we think of Karate Kid Legends?
I was actually pleasantly surprised with how much I kind of enjoyed the movie. And that was mainly because having spoken to a few people and having read a few things online, it seemed like this was meant to be not a complete disaster, but just not a great interpretation of sort of the Karate Kid franchise. But for me, this was just good, light-hearted fun. I don't think there was anything too deep about the story or the characters. I know they, touch on, things like grief, etc. in here, but it doesn't really delve into it too much. I feel like there's a lot of enjoyable characters in here. I feel like the dynamic between Li Fong and Mia in this movie was really good, and it really kind of held the first act together. And I kind of was buying into the relationship between him, her, the father, etc. Even though there was like one moment when Li Fong first comes into the pizza shop and he's a little bit rude to him, which it kind of didn't make sense why that happened. But
I think that's just a New York thing. I spent a month in New York once for job training, and New Yorkers really care about their pizza. Like if you order the wrong kind of pizza, if you just express interest in the wrong kind of pizza, you will get some opinions. Like I've been in similar situations, so that part was probably the most realistic part of the entire movie.
Okay, so I take it back in that case, and that probably fits New York. So I haven't been to New York, so I haven't experienced that. So I'll cut slack from that. For me, it was weird, but then in that context, it makes a little bit more sense. But yeah, no, I really enjoyed the characters in this. I actually kind of just enjoyed Jackie Chan just having fun in this movie. It just looked like he was just kind of prancing about, just having a grand old time, just filming this movie pretty much. And seeing legends like that, having grown up watching so many Jackie Chan movies, to see him just have a bit of fun in this movie, it was good to see. There are negatives with this movie, mainly for me, the fighting, for sure. I felt like the editing was very frantic, very choppy. I don't feel like any of the karate fights were, really that good. You again had a bit of a run-of-the-mill villain in this who was just kind of like the bad guy just for the sake of needing to have a bad guy for the good guy to defeat, which was like, okay. It did feel like there was different ideas or different movies in this that they kind of meshed together, primarily being the kind of like flip on the Karate Kid formula where the kid is the one that's teaching the adult how to fight and how to improve his fighting to win a tournament. But they didn't completely follow that through, and then they changed the story in the second half. So it kind of felt like two different movies, even though it did kind of still flow and make sense logically through the movie. And yeah, there wasn't much depth with any of the characters. Again, like I mentioned, they touched on grief, and we'll kind of get into some of that in the spoiler section. It was kind of just there, and it wasn't really analysed that well. And I don't think it was like delved into particularly well with the protagonist in this or with the mother or anything like that. So I feel like that's where the movie wasn't as strong. But for an easy light summer flick, I feel like overall I just had a good time, even though there wasn't sort of much to it, and even though it's one that's very forgettable. But as a cinema experience, did I have a good time? Did I enjoy myself? Yes.
So for me, this is the best bad movie I've seen all year. We do have some small disagreements, but broadly, my experience was similar to yours. I really like the characters. I think the plot works fine. It's nothing amazing, but it works. I actually thought the martial arts were really good. One of my things is that Hollywood, for some reason, can't do martial arts. They're just not good at it, and I don't know why. And I thought this was like an average Hong Kong action movie, which makes it heads and shoulders above what Hollywood does. So I kind of enjoyed it on that level. The characters were likable. I liked the relationship between Li Fong and Mia. I liked the dad. I liked the mom. I liked the interplay between the two senseis. I just had a good time. I was just smiling for much of the movie, and it was just a good movie experience. It's kind of it gave me the feeling that I want out of a movie, which is I go to be immersed in a story, and I go on a journey with a character, and that character has a journey, and it's fun, and there's some action, and there's some emotion, and in the end, like I walk out of the theater feeling good about myself, and this movie delivers all of that, and so I'm very happy about that. And then my brain came back with a vengeance, and I started thinking about the plot, and I realized how much none of it makes any kind of sense, and I've not been on speaking terms with my brain since then because I'm really mad at it, because I really enjoyed this movie, and I realize it's bad. It's like the plot is just nonsense. I wish it wasn't the case. So let's talk about it.
So I think that's probably the best part to start with. So what is it about the plot that you just, once you start to think about, it all start to fall apart for you?
So I've got a list. A really big one is that there are several moments in the story in which characters make major decisions, but they just show up. And I've complained about this before, and movies have a tendency to do this, where a character has a big change of heart, but we only see them after they've had the change of heart. We do not see them make the decision. So, for example, the mom doesn't want him to fight because that's how she lost her older son, right? Throughout the entire movie, Li Fong is hiding the fact that he is either training Victor, right, Mia's father, to prepare for his fight, or that he is fighting himself. Like, he gets into fights at school and he breaks up like a mugging when the enforcers come after Victor and so on, right? Like, he keeps hiding this from his mother. Then in the final fight, she just shows up. And yes, there is a conversation between Mr. Han and her, where basically he says the only thing he's missing is you, or something like that, which was a fine scene. But I, like, in retrospect, I do not understand why that changed her mind, really. Like, there wasn't really like the thought process of, okay, like, this is where the switch flips, right? Like, and then this is kind of the least important example. The next one is Mr. Han goes to Los Angeles to track down Daniel LaRusso, right? And he just shows up, says, hey, there's a kid that needs to learn some karate. And Daniel says no. And then Mr. Han leaves. And then 2 scenes later, Daniel shows up in New York, ready to train him. I do not know what changed his mind. Any ideas?
Is there no hints of it? No, I was going to say, is there no hint of it in the earlier movies? Because you said that you rewatched all the original Karate Kids. And I feel like he was appealing to the sense of, you know, the original Mr. Miyagi, and how he wouldn't, I can't remember exactly what they were saying in the movie, but essentially how you couldn't, you know, kind of turn away from someone that was in need, or like, you know, someone that you kind of like knew or cared about. And, you know, I feel like Jackie Chan's character was trying to appeal to the sense of, this is my version of you, and he needs both of our help. And what would Mr. Miyagi do? Pretty much. So that's kind of how I was kind of interpreting it. But I don't know if there was anything in the earlier movies that spoke to that a little bit, of the sense of loyalty and, you know, doing the right thing by people.
One of the big themes in the original movies is that Mr. Miyagi's philosophy is that karate is not a weapon and it's not a sport. It's a way of being, right? And it is about helping other people. And if you can help somebody, you really should. And that is the only times he fights, is when he needs to protect somebody else. Throughout the movies, Daniel kind of struggles to kind of accept this philosophy because he just wants to fix things with karate. And Mr. Miyagi says, no, you have to be selfless. You have to do good things with karate, right? I'm not saying it doesn't make sense. I'm saying there isn't really a progression where I understand why he changes his mind. If the philosophy is, well, he's carrying on Mr. Miyagi's legacy, and the Miyagi legacy is to just help people with karate, why does he initially reject it? And if that is not the case, then why does he suddenly accept it, right? Like there is no scene that I caught where he explains or shows what is different, like what changed his mind. And that's kind of really important, right? Because like this is like a big part of the movie, right?
Do you feel like part of the reason for that is, again, the movie is kind of split into 2 parts, where you have the first part where it's about Li Fong, Mia, and, you know, Victor, and their sort of relationship and their dynamic. And then at the later part, you get the 2 senseis, where you could have had the build up to that moment. You could have had something that added a little bit more, or do you feel like it was maybe just a scene or something less than that could have sort of had that moment of realization that helped him, you know, make the decision to actually, you know, travel all that way to help Li Fong in his fight?
Yeah, and you know, Mr. Han is the third example I have of this, right? Where all we really see is that he tries to call, like, Li Fong calls him asking for advice, and then some days later, Mr. Han calls him back, essentially to check on him, and Li Fong doesn't answer. And then he just goes to New York and just kind of makes it his mission to help Li Fong. Like, and all of these 3 examples are not really broken, right? Like, you can imagine a way in which these characters would arrive at those decisions. My point is, the movie doesn't show us their process of reasoning and their process of changing their mind. And you can come up with reasons for all of them, but you have to do that work yourself. And the movie does it 3 times, and it does it for 3 important characters. And that is, I think that is a weakness in the story. Like, these should be character moments. They shouldn't just happen off screen.
For the mother's one specifically, you can understand her reasoning as to why she wouldn't want him getting involved in, you know, fighting and getting involved in tournaments because of what happened to her first son. But I feel like where, grief wasn't, really explored that well in this movie was we had to see the negative impacts of it. We had to see the negative impacts of her holding her son back because of, the fear, to then come to the point of realization that no, she needs to let him, she needs to let go of what happened in the past and allow Li Feng to be who he is essentially. And I just felt like that just wasn't there in the movie. It was just a case of you shouldn't fight, you shouldn't fight, you shouldn't fight. And then that one scene with Jackie Chan, I need to stop calling him Jackie Chan because that's not his name in this movie.
Yeah.
But then she just kind of accepts without an explanation as to why, and why it was good for her to let go of the past, and why it was like good for her to let go of the grief, and how that helped Li Feng be better and be a better fighter in the final tournament that we got.
Yeah, I was going to say, a scene later, she's cheering his son on to punch harder. Like, there's a few steps missing here.
Yeah.
I think that is just not... Like, these characters should have complete arcs, and they should be intertwined with Li Feng's arc. And they aren't really. It's like stuff kind of happens. Another one where I was not convinced by the story is that this whole one route, two branches kind of thing. So this keeps getting repeated throughout the movie, right? So one route, two branches kind of means that karate and kung fu, one of is a classic Japanese martial art, one is a classic Chinese martial art, but they have a common root 500 years ago in China, right? And so they look different, they seem different, but they are actually kind of two sides of the same coin, right? That's kind of the sentiment that's being expressed, and that is reflected in the Han family and the Miyagi family, and that is reflected in kind of Chinese and Japanese cultures and countries, right? So these are all kind of basically this whole idea of we are not that different, we are really connected when you really dig into it, right? That is something that is really in here, and I don't think it really matters in the story, or does it?
No, I don't think so. No, he does use both techniques in the final fight that he uses to be the villain in this or the bad guy in this. But I don't feel like it. Again, all of it should be feeding into Li Feng's development and his character's journey. And I just kind of don't see where it's super important in changing his approach and changing his mindset.
You said like he uses both karate and kung fu. It's there, right? If you really pay attention to it, you can kind of see that he uses kind of moves from both branches, right? But I wasn't convinced by the story that that is what let him win, right? Like this whole thing builds up to like a martial arts tournament, and him being trained in both traditions does not seem to impact how he conducts himself. Like he ultimately wins by doing his signature move, and that's a kung fu move, right? It's a little bit amended because I think Daniel is the one who teaches him how to amend it to counter the counter, right? Because he has the spinning kick, and the first time he uses it on the bad guy, he counters it easily, and so they train a counter move that he then pulls off and then wins, right? Like it's highly telegraphed, it's very obvious, right? But to me, in my head, this should be a reflection of a character arc, right? Like he's able to win the tournament because of where he arrives as a character, as a person. And that appears to be missing. Like in the original Karate Kid, right? Daniel LaRusso is a bullied underdog who's new to town. He doesn't have any friends. His only friend is the Japanese janitor, who turns out to be a master martial artist and who kind of teaches him everything he needs to know to prevail in the end, right? And Daniel winning the karate tournament at the end, in spite of fighting bigger and stronger and more ruthless opponents who cheat all the time, and he still prevails, right? Like that is kind of why the original Karate Kid was a satisfying hero's journey. Here, it's kind of a lot more muddled, right? Like I'm not entirely sure that Li Feng goes onto this kind of journey, right?
I didn't really feel like he had a strong journey in this at all. I don't feel like he kind of started up at one point in the movie and ended up a complete different character, despite all those different pieces that are within this or within his story, where he's finding new friends, dealing with the loss of his brother, and dealing with the impact of training Victor and him getting seriously injured. I don't really feel he ends up too different to where he started off, and I feel like you were kind of going to expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah, I was going to go through the steps about how he is already trained and he has given up fighting, right? He's given up kung fu because he could not protect his brother, right? And fighting is what got his brother killed, even though that's not really true. Like, they kind of get jumped by some bad guys and they tried to fight back and they were outnumbered. That ambush happened, I think, because he won the tournament, right? The brother won a tournament, and this was revenge, I think, if I remember correctly. The solution to that would have been more kung fu, right? It wasn't like fighting got them into trouble. It was, your brother is dead because you didn't fight good enough. You know what I mean? Like the logic of it is a little bit inverted. And I understand that the mother doesn't want him to fight and therefore he doesn't fight, right? The first step of a character arc is really when he realizes that the girl he cares about, her father, needs training. And actually, that whole sequence where Victor essentially talks a teenager into teaching him kung fu, it's a bit weird if you really think about what's actually going on, right? But it's so charming because, first of all, these characters are charming, but also the logic of it, I think, makes sense. Victor really does need to learn this, and he really doesn't have many other options, and he's kind of made one mistake, and that is about to ruin his life. And this kid can kind of turn it all around for him by teaching him some kung fu. And it's weird and kind of stupid, but it works because I like the characters. And I think the characters really, like the actors, really sell it. And I think that is kind of the first big character moment for Li Fong, where he's like, this kind of reflects this idea that karate should be used, or martial arts should be used to help people. And here he's not fighting. He's not just picking fights. He's not just doing reckless things. He's helping somebody improve their life through kung fu, right? If there's ever a reason to break his promise to his mother, this is it, right? Like, there's no ambiguity, there's no dilemma, other than he promised, and now he has to break his promise and he has to hide it. That's the dilemma. But it's like, he's not doing anything stupid. He's not doing anything reckless or objectionable. While the story was at that level, I was really into it. I was really feeling with all of these characters, right? Including Mia, who is watching this unfold, and she realizes why her father's doing this, but she thinks it's a bad idea, and she's concerned that he might get hurt, but also she realizes that this can solve all of their problems. In that whole part, like that part where he starts working at the pizza shop, and he trains Victor, and he's getting closer to Mia, like all of those things, like for a minute he's getting everything he wants, right? And it's kind of perfect, almost. And then it gets more complicated. So that part of the story I was really on board with.
No, I agree. I agree. And I feel like that was, for me, it was the strongest part of the movie anyways. In terms of, like you said, it was like all very charming. It all had the level of heart that you'd want in this movie. And I always use the word heart because it's just like, feels good. It kind of like, just makes you, you feel warm to the characters and everything that's going on. And it was just like, again, just like fun seeing them just do, basic things, just like hanging out at the pizza shop, or even the character that was helping him with his studies, just added another level. He's brilliant in this. He just added like another level of just like warmth into the story, and that's where I was kind of having a lot of sort of the enjoyment, sort of the first part of the movie.
He's just happy to be there. He just wants his friend to succeed. He keeps kind of being his wingman in various ways, right? When they have the bogus pizza order to kind of get Mia to show up on the rooftop, and it's turned into a date, and he's serving like Pepsi in champagne glasses, and he's playing the guitar, and it's just so over the top, but so honest. Normally I don't like the comedy sidekicks, but here, like, this guy was just the right amount of corny and earnest and sincere and amusing.
Yeah. Even for me, the scene was when she was inviting him to the fun fair, and then he just picked up the book and he was like, "Oh, you're doing great at calculus. You're doing so well." And then when she goes, he's like, "Am I actually?" It's like, "No, no, you're doing terribly." I feel like that was like kind of my favorite moment with him in the movie. But for me, it was, and again, I didn't kind of dislike too much of the movie, but it was more when we were kind of getting to the third act and we were getting to the karate tournament, where I felt like we were just kind of like speed running everything at that point, and everything was moving a little bit too fast. And, we kind of whizzed past the majority of the karate tournament. And I get that, we've seen karate tournaments in many, many other movies, etc. But it just felt like, this is a Karate Kid movie. This is what everything always leads up to. And I felt like we could have seen more of the character's journey within the tournament, and we could have seen more of sort of the mother's objections to then sort of coming around to accepting him fighting in this tournament, during these moments in the tournament as well. And again, from like, I know we kind of half disagree on, the karate in this, but for me, I just like didn't really find myself enjoying it. The only time I actually really was enjoying the karate was when Connor was fighting or just kind of beating people up, because he felt hard hitting. He felt like even though he didn't have too much to work with in terms of character and story wise, it just felt like anytime he was putting his hands on people, you could really feel the weight and the strength behind his hits, and you could kind of feel like he was a bit of a force of nature for all the rest of the competitors. But outside of that, I don't know. We had the fight scene in the alleyway between Li Feng, Victor, and the people that were after the money, and I felt that was very disorientating for me. That was just kind of moving a bit too fast, a bit too frantic. I thought the boxing actually was quite good. I thought the boxing fight in this was quite good, but again, even the last fight, I don't know. I just didn't jive with it. And normally, I really do like the karate in these movies, even the Jaden Smith's one in his remake. But I don't know. It just didn't gel with me. And what I hate as well is the choppy action, or where they cut consistently. They they use too many cuts and they don't let it flow. I feel like that's a symptom of a lot of like modern action movies, a lot of superhero movies as well, where they just kind of like cut, and nothing ever feels like it's flowing, and it feels like we're just, I don't know, you never really feel the weight or the impact of the fight because of all the cuts that are happening in between.
I think the editing is really the biggest weak point. The reason I kind of liked it is that I grew up watching like Hong Kong action movies. And if you've seen some of those, most Hollywood action sequences are not impressive. Martial arts movies just have, like the good ones, or even just the average ones, have like this flow to them and this choreography to them. They're very athletic. The actors typically are real martial artists, right? Which I think has generally been the case with Karate Kid movies. I think the major actors have tended to have martial arts backgrounds. It's like I've not researched all of them, but it's at least the case for some of them. A good martial arts movie will be full of real martial artists. They will have good choreographies. They will have inventive, creative choreographies. They will make good use of their environment. And many Western action movies don't really do this, not in the same way. And there were a couple of fights in this. They by themselves, they're very small and they were not that remarkable, but they did this, right? So for example, the back alley fight where Li Feng makes good use of the garbage container, that was pretty good. Like that's above average. Like this is like most action movies will not do this, right? There's this thing where the hero is outnumbered, and so they must use kind of the different opponents against each other, like where they will engineer a situation where one of the bad guys punches the other guy or kicks the other guy, because that's the only way you can defeat your opponents when you're outnumbered, like 3-1 or whatever. And it did that when Mr. Han shows up and he kind of tests Li Feng by pretending to be a burglar. And like I think Li Feng's head bumps against the light switch like several times. And every time it bumps, the light goes on and off, and then you see Mr. Han's face, and then you don't see it again. And that is a classical Hong Kong martial arts movie trope, where you kind of use, like you have a fight scene, but you use the environment in comedic ways. And this movie did this in a couple of different places. And I was just smiling whenever I did that because I missed that. And almost every time when I complain that an action movie is underwhelming, like especially if it's just CGI vomit for 20 minutes and it's just explosions and running and shooting, like that's kind of the kind of thing I'm missing. It's a very small thing, right? This is not genius, right? This is not top tier action choreography, but it's having a little bit of fun and it's a little bit of skill. That's like the minimum hurdle for a fight scene for me. And this movie did it in a couple of different places.
But do you not feel that for a movie that's titled The Karate Kid, and we kind of talked about this about other movies in the previous weeks, about when your movie is about a certain thing, or it's meant to have, that certain element of it to make it, feel like that type of movie within that franchise. So like Final Destination, for example, where you have, the elaborate deaths, etc. I just felt like for it being a Karate Kid movie, they should have been a little bit more focused on making sure that was done really well. And, the whole idea of, having these rooftop stages or rooftop, rings, or whatever they're called in karate. But these rooftop stages, and just kind of like adding a different like twist to it and like, modernizing it a little bit. I kind of was behind it, but we just didn't see it enough. We didn't kind of like see that idea, really come to life. And we didn't kind of see, it would have been a great way to, even showcase other talents as well that, where maybe just like side characters or whatever. I really feel like this movie needed to have allowed, the sort of Li Feng's character to really like shine and allow some of the side characters as well, just to kind of showcase karate again. And I know we've got it in other movies, but I feel like every time you do this type of movie, it's an opportunity for you to showcase the art of karate or the art of kung fu and do it in the most elaborate way. Because the one thing I always give credit to movies like Rocky or Creed or similar to that is every time I watch them, I always feel like I kind of want to do boxing or I want to be a boxer, but I didn't get that same feeling from this movie that I really want to get into karate, or it'd be so cool to learn some karate. And I feel like that's where I probably give it its biggest sin.
Yeah, and I think that's where we just have to disagree, because I was satisfied by the fights. I thought they were decently acrobatic, creative. Each one was a little bit different. The tournaments at the end have never been my favorite part of Karate Kid movies. It's always about first Daniel and Li Feng kind of getting to a place where they can win, and then the actual fight is kind of never all that great. That's kind of at least my thing. I thought we got enough fights, and the fights were good enough. But yeah, that's kind of taste. We kind of skipped past one of the big plot points where I think the plot does not quite hold up. And I think that is kind of the really big one. Like the things I've complained about so far could have been better, but don't break the movie, right? Like it's not like it doesn't make sense or characters add massively out of character or something. It's more like, could you have done this this moment of realization a little bit more explicitly and a bit more convincingly? So the thing that really drags it down is Daniel himself. The reason for it is that this movie makes so I'm specifically talking about when he showed, like, Mr. Han starts training Li Feng, and Daniel then shows up out of nowhere and they kind of start co-training him. And I think their dynamic between Daniel and Mr. Han is wonderful. Like how they're kind of this bickering married couple that kind of is fighting over what lesson Li Feng should learn, and they're constantly trying to one up each other. And kind of there's a point where they're sparring at the same time with Li Feng. Li Feng is in the middle, and then Mr. Han attacks him with kung fu from one side, and Daniel attacks him from karate with the other. And but they're actually arguing with each other. Like, this is a great scene where they keep flipping Li Feng, like throwing him to the floor, and do it like 5 times in a row. But it's actually an argument between them. It doesn't have anything to do with Li Feng. That was a great scene.
Great scene. Yeah, I agree.
The problem I have with it is like on a character and story level. So first of all, like I've mentioned before, that I'm not totally convinced that marrying the two traditions or realizing that they're really the same or that they really work together or that they're stronger together or something, that does not really work, because it's not like he has a blind spot and by learning some karate, he kind of fixes the blind spot. If it's there, I missed it. Because it just seems to be like in the original, whenever Mr. Miyagi had a lesson for Daniel, it was actually a lesson Daniel needed to learn. Whether it's patience or perspective or persistence or integrity or something, right? Like every time Mr. Miyagi does something crazy, it ends up being a valuable lesson, and it ends up being the lesson that Daniel needed to learn at that point. And that is kind of what's missing here, where I'm not convinced that getting these two mentors who have very different philosophies and very different styles coming together and teach, and though kind of their skills coming together in Li Feng, that is what makes Li Feng a better person or a better fighter or enables him to win the tournament. I'm not convinced, right? It does not seem to really happen. In addition to that, I do not see how Mr. Miyagi's teaching were reflected in what Daniel is doing. So Miyagi has a very specific philosophy about karate, right? And he was kind of Daniel's big idol. I've seen some clips from the Cobra Kai show, and it apparently he's like Daniel ends up. I think Cobra Kai is not canon to this movie, but he keeps appearing in various stuff, and he seems to have started his own dojo, and he seems to be carrying on Miyagi karate, right? Watching like all 4 movies, like I've not seen the 2010 movie, I've not seen the next Karate Kid, which is the 4th movie, but just Karate Kid 1, 2, 3, and this one. Put those next to each other, I do not see a through line of Mr. Miyagi's spirit working through Daniel to Li Feng. And it seems like that's what it should have been. It seems like Daniel is his own character with his own life experience, but his big outlook on martial arts and life and stuff like that is shaped by Mr. Miyagi. And I did not really get this from this movie. There do not seem to be lessons that are carried over. And I'm not saying he had to do the wax on, wax off kind of thing again with Li Fong. He's past that, right? And we've seen it before. But just in terms of life philosophy, like if you see the second Karate Kid movie, they go to Japan, to Mr. Miyagi's hometown. It's been taken over by this evil businessman who has like this 40-year grievance with Mr. Miyagi, and he keeps trying to goad Mr. Miyagi into fighting him to get revenge and all of that. And Miyagi just completely ignores it, and the guy basically wrecks Mr. Miyagi's entire hometown, basically to get Mr. Miyagi to a point where he feels he has no choice but to fight. And he does it in order to save the village. He doesn't do it for vengeance. He doesn't do it for satisfaction and so on, right? So Mr. Miyagi has a very specific and strict code. And everything he does, like he kind of plays like the buffoon sometimes a little bit. But underneath, there's this very coherent and very consistent code of what Mr. Miyagi does and why he does it. And the Karate Kid movies are about Daniel learning those lessons and learning why that is a good way and becoming a better person for it. It seems like Daniel now turning into the sensei should be a reflection of that. I did not really catch that, and maybe it's there, maybe it's too subtle, whatever, maybe I was spaced out for 2 seconds, I don't know. But I felt like the plot should be in part informed by Mr. Miyagi's teachings carrying over into the next generation and maybe being applied differently. And maybe you could have had a scene where Daniel teaches a similar lesson to a lesson Mr. Miyagi taught 40 years earlier, but they're taught differently, or Daniel has come to slightly different conclusions, but there's like a good reason why, and stuff like that, right? Like something like that I think is missing in order to be satisfying. He kind of just seems to show up for entirely for fan service, where people like Daniel LaRusso, and so he shows up in this movie, and it's a Karate Kid movie, so he should show up. I felt unsatisfied by that. Like again, like this movie has a really strong emotional core. Like everything between Li Fong, Mia, and Victor is really great, and the mom is also great, and Mr. Han is a lot of fun, and Daniel is a lot of fun, especially when the two interact. But I felt like there was like an emotional core missing. There's like a Daniel-shaped hole in this plot, and I can't quite. Like I don't have a very specific idea of what it needed to be, or what the scene should have been, or what the big lesson should have been. And we shouldn't just rehash like the old movies. But I feel like something's missing, and it feels unintentional, and it feels incomplete and not thought through. Like I'm not convinced that this movie considered what I'm talking about and then had a better idea as far as Daniel is concerned. You know, you could even have had interesting like contrasts where Daniel at 16 in the first movie was a very different person than Li Fong at 16, for example. Right? And that's also not really there. So it's like,
Yeah. Again, kind of back to one of my complaints about the movie was it just felt a little bit hollow in what it was trying to do in its story and how it was, putting it together. Like you said, it really feels like he's just there because Cobra Kai was somewhat successful and he's a callback to the original Karate Kid movies, but there isn't anything that he's like really teaching Li Fong in this. If you try to tie it back to the big thing that is supposedly holding Li Fong back, and again, it don't even feel like it was holding Li Fong back, because even after his brother's passing and even after his mother's warnings, he was still training karate in Japan and he was still very much interested in fighting. So even that element of it is like the only time the fear kind of took over him was when Victor was seriously injured, and then it was a little bit of a callback to his brother. So it's even difficult to try and try and tie one of Daniel's potential lessons into how he could kind of overcome grief and overcome that, because it wasn't really there for Li Feng's character. So yeah, I'm not sure what it could have been. I'm not sure what it should have been, but I do feel like there just is that element of I feel like for the majority of characters, because I don't actually know how any of the characters properly feed into a change in Li Feng. It doesn't seem like he's gone from being selfish to being something noble and wanting to help out. He always seemed like he was like a good person that was like looking out for the people that he cares about.
That's his problem. There is actually an internal conflict in this, and that is he wants to please his mother, or not. He doesn't want to lie to her. He doesn't want to upset her, and he wants to help Victor. And he cannot do both. That's the internal conflict. And that is really the part that really works, right? Like internal conflicts generally are what good stories are made of. And Li Feng has one. And I think he struggles with it. And he kind of tries to have it both ways, and then it blows up in his face. And, and there are complications and setbacks and all of that. Like that part, I think really, really works. And I think that was the part where I was really on board with it.
Would you say it completely worked? Because it does feel like there was a certain point of the movie where the mother becomes a little bit of a non-factor and almost disappears from the story and isn't that force that he's still trying to please and isn't that force that he's still trying to, keep happy. It kind of feels like once Mr. Han comes around, it's like, he kind of forgets everything that his mother's been warning him about and he's ready to fight in this tournament and he's going to do it anyways. There isn't that moment between his mother and him about why, like, he really shouldn't, and why, because he does realize, he realizes it at the hospital in terms of Victor and someone else that he cares about is now hurt because of fighting and because of the situation that they were in. But that's also fear that he had within him. I know his mother made a few comments about about him getting back involved in fighting, but that was also his fear taking over, and it was like something from his past repeating again. So it doesn't really feel like his mother really had that much of an influence in the story past a certain point to, really give that conflict within him of, whether he should help someone or whether he should, please his mother, enough kind of like weight to it to, really, really hold the story together.
I do think her purpose in the story is to create the dilemma. One thing they didn't really emphasize a lot is how important family is in Chinese culture. Like, all cultures care about their families, but like in China, disobeying your parents is a bigger deal than it is for us, right? And that was not really emphasized, but it's in there, and that is why it's such a big deal. He's not just a good kid, he's not just a good guy, and that is why he doesn't want to upset his mother. No, like, actually defying your mother in this way is a pretty big deal. And I think even the fact that he's been hiding his training while they're in Beijing as well, relatively big deal. I just think the part that really doesn't quite work is how he overcomes his paralysis, right? So his brother died because he froze up when he tried to help. And then he creates a rift between him and Mia when Victor is admitted to the hospital and she needs him there for support, and he cannot enter the hospital because of his unprocessed trauma, right? Like he has these flashbacks to the death of his brother and he just cannot do it, right? He freezes up again. Also, I think when Victor gets attacked but in the back alley, he freezes up for a minute and Victor gets hurt because of it. And then he snaps out of it when he gets attacked himself, if I remember correctly. But at minimum, he freezes up for a minute. So he has the problem of indecisiveness, right? He does not want to commit. He does not want to actually do it. He knows what he should do, but he cannot do it, right? I was kind of missing like a plot beat where he actually overcomes this. Like, on a story level, Victor being in the hospital means that he is now their only chance. I felt like there was something missing where he has this mental block and he doesn't seem to overcome the mental block. And wouldn't it have been cool if Daniel is the reason he overcomes it? Daniel has some kind of wise Miyagi teaching or something that helps him overcome his mental block, because it's not about being a good enough fighter, right? It's more about getting into the mental space. And that is really what Miyagi's teaching was about, getting you into the right headspace so that you can do the right thing and you can succeed at what you need to do. And I think maybe that is what they should have done, unless it's in there and I missed it.
I mean, you have Mr. Han, who kind of steps in and pretty much tells him that, if someone needs your help, then, you kind of have to help them. I can't remember how the line exactly goes, but essentially says that and then drags him to the hospital, and then everything seems fine after that point.
Yeah, I think that the line is, my friend's problems are my problems, or something like that. Yeah, so it's not like there's nothing, but it's more like this should have been like the big pivotal character moment, and that is not really there, right? Like you can see the big steps, but I think there are gaps in this, and the reason it felt so unsatisfying to me overall, even though I liked so much of it, is because those pieces are missing. Like, if these holes didn't exist in the plot, it would be like an excellent movie. Like, it would do everything I want a movie to do. And because it skips a couple of steps like this, I think that is what holds it back for me.
Another thing that I kind of wanted to touch on was Connor in this and his role. And there's one thing that you always mention about how the hero and the villain should be a mirror of each other, essentially, and how they kind of should have almost kind of go through the same thing, but kind of pivot and go in different directions.
They don't have to be, but that's one way to do it.
Yeah, they don't have to be with that. Yeah, but like I said, there's one way to do it. I feel like it was almost like a missed opportunity here, because there's hints to what he was like previous to joining the dojo. So, Mia says that he wasn't always like that, before he kind of like got ingrained with, those people, turned him into a little more of an angry or more violent person, etc. And I felt like, obviously we had the theme of grief and, Li Feng losing his brother, and he almost shied away from the fight, or, was a little bit more hesitant, a little bit more fearful. And it would have been interesting. And I don't know how much it would have really added to the story, but if you had Connor had gone through, not something similar, but had also, dealt with a little bit of loss, and in doing so, turned, more towards violence, whereas Li Feng was a little bit more, cautious of it and was like a little bit more fearful of the fight. Connor kind of like tuned all the way into it, and like, channeled rage and this, that, and the other, and more angrier emotions. And it could have been an interesting contrast of the two, and how, different ways to deal with grief, and how both could potentially be destructive in a way. And again, kind of tying back to Daniel LaRusso's character, how you kind of find balance within that, and how you have some type of lessons or teaching that he teaches Li Feng in it, which the villain didn't get that teaching because he went to the other dojo and he had a more harsher teacher on his side that taught him, all that he taught him was rage and anger and channeling your emotions in the wrong way, essentially.
And that is pretty standard for Karate Kid villains. Like, they all are pretty cartoonish, pretty one-dimensional, pretty much just bad guys. Some of them have a little bit of nuance, but that has like interesting villains. I don't think have ever been really a strong suit of the franchise. They are always just a challenge to Daniel and now Li Feng, right? Where the easy way would be to be like them, and maybe you would have a higher chance of winning if you were like them. There's a line in, I forget which of the Karate Kid movies it was. I think it was the second one, where Mr. Miyagi agrees to fight the bad guy, but as a condition, for like that, I'm not going to recap the entire movie, but essentially the villain wants to fight Mr. Miyagi. Mr. Miyagi refuses, and when Mr. Miyagi agrees to it, he makes a condition, and the villain thinks it's a small thing, but Mr. Miyagi gets what he wants just by showing up, essentially, because that was his real goal. And then Daniel says, "No, what are you doing? Like, do you think you can win this?" And Mr. Miyagi says, "I've already won, because I got what I wanted, and that is because I was true to my principles." And I think that's another scene where he says something like, "If you give up your principles to win, you've already lost." Stuff like something like that. So the villains tend to be challenges to the integrity of the hero in a Karate Kid movie. That is kind of what's happening here, but in a slightly different way, right? Where his integrity is that he wants to help Victor, and his integrity requires that he respects his mother's wishes. And he cannot do both, and he has to disappoint at least one of them. I think that's the purpose of the villain. Now, he could have been more interesting if he'd had a more interesting backstory, or a more interesting goal, or maybe more parallels to Li Feng. Like, all of that is definitely true. But I think he serves his purpose by putting Li Feng into a situation where he can take the easy path, or he can take the noble path. It's a little bit amended to the original trilogy, but it's kind of there. Like, that's why these villains exist. And that is kind of why, like, the evil dojo is so brutal and so such hard asses, and why they emphasize winning and at all costs, even if it means cheating and stuff like this, right? And the heroes have always had these handicaps of wanting to win with integrity, and that makes it harder.
Yeah, and I definitely recognize that in the movies, but again, after you've seen it so many times, it just becomes like just kind of whatever, and it's not as interesting. And I just kind of felt like anytime he was in talking scenes in this, like whether it was on the train or whatever, it just kind of brought the movie down a little bit, just because it was just like, oh, he's just generic bad guy.
Yeah, they were certainly like very one-dimensional, very standard, right? Like, there's not much nuance to what they're doing. But one thing I kind of like about it is about how they're different to the villains in the original, but still keep the essence of it, right? Like, this keeps a lot of the basic templates or basic ingredients of a Karate Kid movie, right? Like, Li Feng is not as much of an underdog, but he's in a new city, and he's not quite strong enough to just solve all problems. The villains are kind of very cartoonish, overbearing, can't be reasoned with, right? There's no possibility to just talk it out, right? Like, it has to end in a fight in some way. So I think this movie does kind of have enough of a connection to the older movies to feel like the same thing, even though some things are different. I think that's a good update to the formula a little bit. All right, shall we wrap it up?
Just last thoughts on Karate Kid Legends. Again, this is a good time in the cinema. It's a good fun watch. You've got, great characters, great amount of heart in this. Good laughs as well, surprisingly. Good laughs. Got some good laughs out of me. It's overall a fun time. Lighthearted, like I mentioned at the start, but just lacking enough depth with the characters, lacking enough development, and lacking enough, substance to the story, really. But as just a nice light summer flick, if you just want to go to the cinema, if you're familiar with the franchise, and if it's the type of movie that you typically enjoy, I feel like you'll have a good time with this movie. And again, it tries to update the formula in different ways. It tries to change things a little bit without breaking the formula. And I feel like where it did it, it worked. Like we mentioned about how for a period in this movie he was teaching Victor how to fight, and it was a nice flip on the student and the master. Again, having the two senseis, just nothing but fun, nothing but good laughs. And again, just to reiterate, that scene where they're arguing and they're just flipping Li Feng's character onto the floor repeatedly, some of the best laughs you'll have in the cinema so far this year. So with that said, I will give it a solid 7 out of 10.
Yeah, so I've been complaining about little details for about an hour now, and that makes it sound like I didn't like the movie, but actually this was the most fun I've had in the cinema for. It's not the best movie this year, but it's definitely maybe the best time I've had. Like, I just enjoyed it. The action works, the characters work, the romance works, the plot is also there. I think the plot needed to be polished a little bit, and that is what it could have turned it from good to great. And it's a little bit frustrating that they didn't do that. And so for that reason, I give it a Chaboudois out of 5. That means it's almost good enough.
Great. Well, you heard it here first. And if you reached this part of the episode, thank you very much for working with us. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed our discussion today, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we were just chatting, talking a bunch of mumbo jumbo, you should probably tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast. See you later. Arrivederci.
Bye bye.